Hey everyone, and welcome to the Sunny Go One Piece podcast. On this episode, I'll be going into the 21st cover story titled Solo Journey of Jinbe, Knight of the Sea, which spans 20 installments from chapter 751 through 785, taking place after the events of the Fishman Island arc, and even more specifically, just after the 8th installment of the last cover story we just covered in the previous podcast, Caribou's Ki-Hi-Hi-Hi in the New World, after he drops off Caribou at the G5 Marine base. And I believe this is the first time we kind of get a sequel to the previous cover story, or I guess more accurately, like a spin-off to it. So this will be interesting. Short synopsis. Jinbe, after dropping off Caribou at the G5 Marine base, heads off into the sea, but along the way comes across a lost sea kitten and decides to help it find its way back home with the help of a sea police dog. On the journey, Jinbe runs into other folks who need assistance, but once they get to the sea kitten's home, they find that it is not there, and now they have to go to get to the bottom of this incident. Okay, so let's get into the actual cover story itself. This is one of the more relatively shorter and simpler cover stories, so let's get into it. The cover story begins right after Jinbe drops off Caribou at the G5 Marine base, after apprehending him trying to abduct more mermaids at Fishman Island in the previous cover story, and to regroup with his crew, the Sun Pirates, to presumably take care of his unfinished business, which, based on his conversation with Neptune at the end of the Fishman Island arc, is to inform his crew of his desire to join Luffy and the Straw Hats, as well as to cut ties with Big Mom, as it was stated that during the time skip, due to Whitebeard's death, Jinbe made a deal to have the Sun Pirates join Big Mom's fleet as a subordinate crew in order to secure protection for Fishman Island. Along the way, he runs into a sad and lost sea kitten, and this little guy is so freaking cute. You'll remember sea cats were introduced all the way back just before the Arabasta arc, where on the way the crew was becoming really hungry on their journey from Drunk Island to Arabasta, and they try to catch and eat one of these in this hilarious moment where Luffy, Zoro, and Sanji all go feral due to hunger, but are stopped by Vivi, saying that sea cats are sacred in Arabasta culture. That was seemingly a full-grown adult sea cat, but this one is just a sea kitten that's become lost from its family and home, and Jinbe, the good guy that he is, decides to step in and help. So he then finds a police sea dog, because that's a thing, I guess, complete with a police cap, sunglasses, and a mustache, which is just comical. And if you look close, you can see it has its own police station at the bottom of the ocean. And so, as it happens, the sea police dog happens to live in the same town that the sea kitten lives in. So together they all go out in search of the sea kitten's home. But shockingly, once they get there, the sea kitten's home is completely gone. They do manage to find the sea police dog's house flipped over on its side, creating its own new mystery. Just then, above them, they notice a capsizing ship in need of help, after what looks like they've been attacked by some sort of sea beast with huge gashing claw marks all over the ship. The people on the ship thank Jinbe after he prevents the ship from completely capsizing. The passengers show Jinbe a newspaper, and this is the point at which he learns of Luffy and Law's alliance, and it shocks him, which puts this moment just prior to the Dressrosa arc. But really what the passengers wanted to show Jinbe was not the front page with Law and Luffy's news, but an article further into the newspaper with the headline that shows the sea beasts are rampaging. And again, with the sea kitten looking on, all cute looking, like seriously, this thing looks so cute in every scene. They eventually make their way to the port town and discover that for some unknown reason, the sea kitten's home is on top of the port town. The sea kitten's home looks like an ancient underwater ruin, which is kind of surprising too. But after speaking with the residents of this port town, Jinbe learns that these ruins suddenly were dropped onto the town, kind of destroying it, which then led to the sea creatures wrecking their ships. And on top of that, their offering to these sea beast creatures has also disappeared. And when Jinbe goes to the offering altar, they discover that what should have been a mountain of offerings is completely missing now. The kanji written on the arch altar says sea god in Japanese. And just then, the Jinbe actually witnesses, to his shock, another piece of undersea ruins just being chucked out of the ocean onto this port town. So Jinbe dives underwater to investigate where this is coming from. And once he reaches the seafloor, he finds a huge pile of barrels that had contained all the offerings to the sea beasts from the people of the port town littered everywhere. And the culprit is discovered to be Wadatsumi, the umibozu that we saw in Fishman Island. Now, as you recall, an umibozu is what you call a mythical sea creature from Japanese folklore that usually is a bad thing for sailors if they encounter one. The funny thing is, though, is that if you recall, the kanji written on the offerings arch is, as it's written, is sea god, but another way you could read those same kanji is Wadatsumi. So technically, Wadatsumi wasn't actually in the wrong, I guess, if he just read it the way he read it. He reads his own name. But for those that don't remember, Wadatsumi, after being beaten by both Sanji and Jinbe in tandem, was exiled from Fishman Island and was carried away by Surume, the giant kraken, after the battle. And in the next installment, Wadatsumi explains that what happened after those events of Fishman Island. Basically, he regains consciousness, he began swimming and found this offering altar and helped himself to the offerings without knowing that it was meant for the sea beasts. Jinbei then scolds Wadatsumi, explaining to him what he basically caused by doing that. And turns out it wasn't even the offerings that pissed off the sea beasts. It was actually Wadatsumi mistakenly thinking that the ruins belonged to the humans, and him trying to kind of, it was well intentioned. He tried to return those ruins back to the people, but instead, not only is the sea kitten using this as their home, but all the sea beasts were using it as their home, and they thought the humans were stealing their home, which prompted them to retaliate and attack the port people's ships. Jinbei also explains this misunderstanding to the sea beasts as well, and in the next installment we see everyone, the sea beasts, Wadatsumi, the people of the port town, apologize and forgive each other for this chaotic misunderstanding. And we also get to see the sea kitten get reunited with its parent, and Jinbei just kind of floating there like, oh brother, what was this kind of ridiculous headache? But he's glad that it's over. One thing that I have come to really like about Jinbei is just how level-headed he is. You can tell he has always been one of the more diplomatic people, from his portrayal in the Fisher Tiger flashback to when he was trying to keep Luffy from hurting himself in Marineford, as well as trying to make sure that Luffy and the Straw Hats wouldn't be perceived as enemies when they came in and tried to, quote-unquote, help the Fishman Island from Hody's attack. And he's always able to calm people even when tensions are high between groups of people who don't trust each other. And this makes him the perfect bridge to carry on Fisher Tiger and Queen Otohime's dream of uniting the surface world and Fishman Island. Additionally, when he goes to ultimately join the crew, he will be a very unique stabilizing member of the crew when things get crazy. Like, Jinbei is one that is capable of staying level-headed, but also have the strength to rein in the monster trio if they get a little too rambunctious, as it were. Now, getting back to the cover story, the next installment is probably the most significant addition to the story as a whole, because we see the port townsfolk present a poneglyph to Jinbei that they discovered inside the ruins when Wadatsumi threw it there. And to the surprise of Jinbei, and I love how the exclamation point has a little, like, cute smiling whale shark as the dot at the bottom of the exclamation point. Like, I just think that's really funny. I like to think that this indicates that Jinbei is surprised, but also pleasantly surprised. And this is a pretty huge revelation, but I'll get more into this later on about how this impacts the story and the world building. But moving on, the ruins are returned back to the ocean where all the sea beasts get their home back, and in order to make up for mistakenly destroying the port town's people's ships, the sea beasts are now working with the people to act as their ships by strapping seating on their backs. And honestly, this was probably a better deal for everyone involved. They're all, seen, including Wadatsumi, having a banquet party, celebrating this sort of new unity between everyone. And this is cool because it's one small step closer for Jinbei in terms of his dream of uniting the sea and the surface worlds. The next day, Wadatsumi expresses interest in joining Jinbei and the Sun Pirates and says he wants to accompany Jinbei. Jinbei agrees, and with a new kimono from the people and the poneglyph as gifts, he and Wadatsumi set off to rejoin the Sun Pirates. And thus ends this cover story. So yeah, pretty short. Let's kind of get into the review part of it. So this is definitely Another one of the more simple and kind of shorter cover stories, but I actually enjoy this one. Having a Straw Hat member be the center of a story helps for sure, but it's actually a really cute story that has some really fun moments between the cute sea kitten, the hilarious sea dog policeman, and some huge relevance to the main story with the ruins and the poneglyph. It does make for an interesting story. I also really love, as I mentioned earlier, how this furthers Jinbe's ultimate goal of uniting the surface and the sea world. Overall, this is a short and simple but fun little cover story that actually carries some weight to the main story. Now, how will this carry over into the main story, you might ask? First off, Jinbe and the Sun Pirates now have a fairly powerful ally in Wadatsumi. He might be a little stupid, but in terms of raw size and power, it's hard to beat Wadatsumi. But now, on to the biggest reveal in the cover story is the poneglyph. This was honestly such a crazy surprise reveal because you'd think something as significant as a poneglyph wouldn't be introduced in something like a cover story, but here it is. Without Robin, we can't really know what the poneglyph says, as well as what Jinbe plans on doing with this poneglyph. My initial thought when I first read this was that he would bring this with him when he eventually reunites with the Straw Hats to have Robin actually look at it. I'll talk about this in the spoiler section of what actually happens with the poneglyph, but we do know what he does with this poneglyph as of where we are in the current story, which is chapter 1171. The other interesting implication of this cover story is that there are ruins underwater, which means that at some point there was a civilization that lived there, and not just any civilization, but one that housed a poneglyph, meaning that at some point in the distant past, there were perhaps allied, countries with the ancient kingdom living here. However, the bigger thing is that this fueled further the theory that the One Piece world was actually a post-apocalyptic world that was flooded at some point and is still somewhat sinking. I and many began having this thought/theory with the introduction of Water 7. I mean, that definitely made me think about that as well. We learned that the water was rising in Water 7 and that the sea level was continuing to rise. That combined with the strange low-tech nature of the world led many to believe that there was some catastrophic event that happened that sort of reset the world. And what we're seeing in the present day is actually the higher elevation points of the land masses from the past that are now just isolated islands scattered throughout the world. And you kind of saw this as in a microcosm with Long Ring Lungland when we saw Tonjit, like every time the sea would recede, they would connect into one big donut. But when the water would rise up, you'd only see the tops and you'd have a bunch of these islands. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing with the One Piece world is that, because it was said that the ancient kingdom was a very technologically advanced, society, and something must have happened that basically caused this mass sort of sinking, and you got all these little tiny islands, spread out throughout the world, and all that technology was kind of lost. And now you got this like people using flintlock, rifles and dendenmushis, and a lot of things are very low tech. Even though there are a lot of high tech things in One Piece, it's kind of like very inconsistent because you have things like Frankie who can shoot laser beams and like machine guns out of his own hand. But it is very interesting to see how that progresses. There are even some people that theorize that it is actually the One Piece world is actually our own real world Earth because of the fact that many of the islands are very culturally similar to our real world locales, like Water 7 being like Venice, Italy, Dressrosa being like Spain, Arabasta being kind of similar to Egypt. I personally think, while fun, I don't think this makes much sense because the geography just really doesn't line up. I think it's just Oda drawing inspiration from our real world. But yeah, there are other clues that led many people to believe this theory that the world had been flooded, as in Fishman Island, we saw essentially what was Noah's Ark. It was even called the Noah, alluding to the classical biblical story where Noah built an ark to transport animals when God flooded the world. And I mean, if that isn't a clear clue that Oda is at least trying to implant that idea of a world being flooded, I don't know what to tell you because that's pretty freaking clear. But yeah, it's an interesting theory, and I think later, we will get more information on the past in terms of the history of the world of One Piece. That kind of helps to see if this theory actually pans out or not. And I'll talk a little bit more about, or I guess I'll touch on this a little bit in the spoilers. I won't really go too far into detail because I think that conversation's better left when we get to, the point where more information actually starts to get added to the story. But yeah, that brings Jinbe's little side adventure to a close, but it'll be fun to see what happens next and how Jinbe will be reintegrated back into the main story and to hopefully join the main Straw Hat crew. But yeah, on the next podcast, we'll get back into the anime. However, it will be a filler arc with the Silvermine arc, which I'm not a big fan of, as you will see. But yeah, hopefully you still listen to that, because we will talk about the new opening and such, so there will still be some fun things to talk about. But if you did enjoy this, send me a like or comment, and if you want to join me on this journey of rewatching One Piece, please consider subscribing. Check out my Instagram at SunnyGo Podcast if you want updates when I post new episodes, and to see some pictures of my manga collection and my card collection. And as always, I wanted to thank you for taking the time out to listen to my podcast. Just a couple little points that I wanted to mention in the spoiler section, but if you're not interested in that, stay safe out there, and I hope to see you on the next episode. Bye! Alrighty, so spoiler section. As always, these sections aren't really all that scripted, just more my ramblings. But I guess the first thing is the poneglyph that's discovered in this cover story. We do learn that it is what Jinbe presents Big Mom later to kind of soften the blow of him leaving, even though Big Mom still gives him that ultimatum of life or death, whatever, or yeah, which creates that awesome moment and where he basically declares that Luffy will become the Pirate King. But yeah, we never actually learn what's actually written on this poneglyph though. So yeah, I would assume that this is one of those sort of like just poneglyphs filled with history more so than any relevance to any of the road poneglyphs or even actual information about the ancient kingdom. The other thing too, of course, in Egghead Island, it's basically confirmed this theory that we had at this time about the world sinking and that there was an ancient civilization that lived long ago that the world was eventually flooded over with. And so, yeah, it is interesting that all of these things kind of kept piling up, as we saw, starting with Water 7, then with Eniasabi, Long Ring Longland, and then you go to this, Fishman Island, and then this cover story, and then obviously we then get to Egghead Island. So yeah, it was interesting to see like the progression of this, and I'd say this is one of the bigger ones that kind of contribute to that theory. If you missed this cover story, yeah, all of that stuff makes sense, but it is interesting that there were more clues to pointing to this, and that a lot of the theories that people had did end up being true. And this one was a pretty obvious one. I think, even I figured this one out on my own. And I'm not the biggest theorizer, as you probably can tell. But yeah, I do find this one really interesting, how it kind of fits into all of that. But yeah, other than that, there's not really too much else to really go over. So yeah, this is a shorter episode, but I appreciate you sticking around, and I hope to see you on the next episode. See ya!